Far beyond the quiet stars of the outer spiral arm, the vast empire of the Zetherian Empire ruled thousands of systems with cold precision. Their fleets moved through space like silent storms, powerful, organized, and feared across the galaxy. Their ships were large, dark, and shaped like blades that could cut through planets if ordered, and on the glowing throne world called Zithera Prime. The ruler of this empire watched the galaxy from a palace made of crystal metal and living light. She was known as Queen Archelaus, the alien queen who had conquered star systems that other civilizations had never even seen. Her mind was calm, calculating, and never easily surprised, because in her long rule she had learned that most species in the galaxy were predictable, weak, and easy to control. On this quiet cycle, a tall alien officer stepped into the throne chamber and bowed his head. It was Supreme Commander Veron, the leader of the Empire's fleets. His armor reflected the purple light of the chamber, while the Queen's eyes slowly focused on him. "Report," she said calmly. The commander activated a glowing star map in the air. A small blue planet appeared on the display. It looked peaceful, covered in oceans and green land, a new colony world on the edge of explored space. "Our scouts discovered a new species settlement," Veron explained. "They call themselves humans." The Queen studied the image for a moment. Humans were not an unknown name, but they were not considered important either. In most reports, they were described as young, scattered, and technologically weaker than the major powers of the galaxy. "A minor species," the Queen said with quiet confidence. "Nothing unusual." The commander nodded slowly, but his voice carried a small note of uncertainty. "This colony is small, only a few thousand humans. They have a single orbital station and limited defense ships." The Queen almost smiled. To her, this sounded like another simple expansion opportunity for the Empire. "Send a scout fleet," she ordered. "Observe them first. If they resist, we will take the colony." Across the stars, many light years away, the small human colony lived in peaceful silence on a distant world called Haven 12. It was not a large or powerful place. There were farms, small cities, repair stations, and a simple spaceport where cargo ships came and went slowly. Nothing about the colony looked dangerous or impressive. At the edge of the colony's main landing zone, a human man worked quietly on a damaged cargo shuttle. His clothes were simple, his hands were covered with grease, and a small tool floated beside him in zero gravity while he repaired a broken engine plate. His name was Daniel Carter, and to anyone watching, he looked like the most ordinary man in the galaxy. Daniel was a mechanic. He fixed engines, repaired cargo ships, and sometimes helped the colony maintain its old defense satellites. Most people in the colony liked him because he was calm and friendly. He did his work quietly and rarely talked about his past. At that same moment, far above the planet, 3 dark shapes appeared silently from hyperspace. They were alien scout ships from the Zetherian Empire. Their sensors immediately began scanning the human colony below. The alien officers inside the ships watched the planet with curiosity. Their instruments measured buildings, technology, energy signals, and defense systems. "This is their settlement?" one scout asked with confusion. "Yes," another replied. "Very primitive compared to our standards." They focused their sensors on the spaceport, and soon their scanners stopped on one human working beside a shuttle. "That one appears to be a simple worker," the alien analyst said. Daniel Carter continued tightening bolts on the engine without noticing the alien ships far above him. He looked calm, relaxed, almost bored as he worked slowly under the warm light of the colony sun. Back on Zithera Prime, the alien queen listened to the first scout reports with little interest. "A farming colony with a few repair stations," the officer explained. "Their technology level is low compared to ours." The Queen nodded slightly. This was exactly what she expected. "Then they will not resist," she said. But before the report ended, Supreme Commander Veron looked carefully at a second screen that had just appeared beside him. The display showed something unusual in the deep space around the colony. Very faint signals, almost invisible, like sleeping machines waiting in silence. The commander's eyes narrowed. "Run the scan again," he ordered quietly. The technician repeated the scan, and the strange readings appeared again. dozens of hidden objects far from the colony, objects that did not move and did not transmit signals. The officer frowned. Possibly old satellites, he suggested. But the commander did not answer immediately. Something about the pattern felt strange. Meanwhile, on the planet below, Daniel finished repairing the shuttle engine and wiped the grease from his hands. He looked up at the bright sky for a moment, as if thinking about something far away. Then he calmly picked up his tools and walked back toward the station like a man who had nothing to worry about. Far above him, the alien scout ships continued watching the small human colony, completely convinced they were observing a weak and ordinary world. But inside the Imperial Palace, Supreme Commander Veron slowly turned toward the Queen again. "My Queen," he said carefully, "there may be more here than we expected." Queen Archelaus tilted her head slightly, curious for the first time. "What do you mean, Commander?" The commander looked again at the strange signals on the star map. "I believe we should observe longer before taking action," he said quietly. The Queen considered this for a moment, then waved her hand dismissively. "Very well. Watch them if you wish," she said calmly. But as the alien fleet continued its silent approach toward the human colony, a quiet tension began to grow in the darkness of space. Because somewhere in the shadows beyond Haven 12, something was waiting. And before the story continues, if you enjoy mysterious HFY science fiction stories, gently consider subscribing to this channel so you do not miss the next part of this unfolding galactic encounter. Down on the colony, Daniel Carter stepped inside the repair station and looked at a small console screen that had just blinked with a silent notification. He read the message once, then calmly closed the display. High above the planet, the alien scout fleet had no idea that their arrival had already been noticed. And even the powerful queen of the Zytherian Empire did not yet realize that the ordinary human they had seen working on a cargo shuttle might be the most dangerous man in the entire system. High above the quiet blue world of Haven 12, the three dark scout ships of the Zytherian Empire remained hidden in the shadows of the planet's outer orbit, their engines silent, their sensors wide open, watching every signal and every movement coming from the human colony below. The alien officers inside the ships expected to see panic, fear, or at least some form of defensive reaction, because in their long experience, most young species reacted with confusion the moment an unknown fleet entered their system. But what they saw instead only created more questions. The human colony continued its daily routine as if nothing unusual had happened. Cargo ships landed slowly at the port, farmers worked the land beyond the small cities, and repair crews moved around the stations fixing old machines and transport vessels. It was calm, almost too calm. Inside the command deck of the lead scout vessel, an alien analyst looked at the sensor data again and again with growing confusion. "There are no emergency signals," he said slowly. "No military alert. No planetary defense activation. It is as if they do not even know we are here." Another officer leaned closer to the display and shook his head. "That is impossible. Our ships are not invisible. Even a basic sensor array should detect us." The first analyst zoomed the scan toward the surface. Again, focusing on the spaceport where human workers continued their tasks without hesitation. The same human mechanic from earlier was still there, moving from one ship to another with calm patience, tightening bolts, checking fuel lines, and replacing damaged panels. The aliens identified him again through their scans. His name appeared in the colony's public data network as Daniel Carter. Occupation: mechanical technician. No active military rank. No recorded criminal history. Just an ordinary citizen working a quiet job on a distant colony. Back on the throne world of Zythera Prime, the enormous palace chamber glowed with soft purple light, while Queen Archelaus listened to the continuous reports from the scout fleet. Her expression remained calm and slightly bored as the officers described the peaceful human settlement. To her, it sounded exactly like every other weak frontier colony the Empire had encountered before. She leaned back slightly on her throne and spoke with quiet certainty. "Then the situation is simple. Prepare a small occupation fleet. The colony will submit without resistance." But standing beside the holographic star map, Supreme Commander Veron did not immediately agree. His eyes were fixed on the strange data pattern that still appeared in the outer edges of the system. The faint signals that had appeared earlier had not disappeared. They were still there, quiet, unmoving, like sleeping machines hidden in the dark. The commander crossed his arms slowly while the technicians continued analyzing the readings. Increase scan depth. He ordered, search for cloaked structures or inactive satellites. The technicians obeyed, and the map expanded outward, revealing dozens of tiny points spread across deep space far from the colony itself. Their power signatures were extremely low, almost impossible to detect unless someone was searching very carefully. One of the officers looked up nervously. "Commander, there are more of them than we thought." The commander narrowed his eyes slightly. "How many?" The officer hesitated for a moment before answering. "At least 40, possibly more." The chamber became quiet for a second, because 40 hidden objects around a peaceful farming colony did not make sense, especially when those objects were positioned in a perfect spherical pattern around the planet, almost like a defensive net waiting to wake up. Meanwhile, on Haven 12, the sun was beginning to set across the wide metal landing fields of the colony spaceport. Long shadows stretched across the ground while workers slowly finished their daily tasks. Daniel Carter closed the engine panel of the shuttle he had been repairing and stepped back to check the system diagnostics. The engine lights turned green one by one, showing that the repair was successful. Another mechanic nearby smiled and gave him a thumbs up. Daniel nodded quietly but did not celebrate. His attention had already moved to a small console attached to the wall of the repair bay. A single yellow light blinked softly on the screen. The message contained only a few words, but they were enough to change the calm rhythm of the evening. He read the notification carefully, then looked up toward the darkening sky beyond the open hangar doors. Far above the atmosphere, the alien scout ships continued their silent observation. But Daniel seemed strangely unsurprised by the information he had just received. He touched the console once more and typed a short response before turning away, as if nothing important had happened. Back inside the alien scout ship, the analysts were becoming more uneasy. "Commander," one of them reported through the communication channel, "we are detecting small signal bursts across the colony network. Very short transmissions." The commander responded immediately from the Imperial Palace Command Center. "Are they distress signals?" The analyst shook his head slowly, even though the commander could not see him. "Negative. The signals are encrypted and extremely short, almost like automated." "Status checks." "Status checks for what?" the commander asked quietly. The analyst hesitated again before answering. "We do not know." At that same moment, deep in the darkness beyond the planet, one of the silent objects floating in space emitted the faintest pulse of energy before returning to its inactive state. The alien sensors barely noticed it, but the commander's display captured the signal pattern and enlarged it across the holographic map. His eyes focused sharply on the data. The pulse had lasted less than half a second, but its structure looked highly advanced, far more advanced than the simple colony below should possess. Behind him, Queen Archelaus watched the commander's growing concern with mild curiosity. "You seem troubled, Commander," she said slowly. Veyron looked back at the map and then answered carefully. "My queen, the humans are behaving strangely." "Strangely how?" the queen asked. "They are not afraid," the commander replied. "They're not preparing for evacuation or surrender. They're simply continuing their work as if our presence does not matter." The queen gave a small, amused smile. "Perhaps they're simply foolish." The commander did not smile back. His eyes returned to the hidden objects floating around Haven 12. "Or perhaps," he said quietly, "they already know exactly what we are doing." Down on the surface of the colony, Daniel Carter stepped outside the repair station and looked up at the stars again. The sky above Haven 12 was clear and bright, thousands of distant lights shining across the darkness of space. Somewhere among those stars, the alien scout fleet waited and watched, believing they were the hunters studying a weak and simple world. Daniel stood there for a long moment with a calm expression. Then he quietly spoke a single sentence under his breath, almost like someone remembering an old rule. "Let them watch," he murmured softly, because far beyond the colony, hidden in the silent dark where the alien sensors could barely see, something had already begun to wake up, and the warning that the Supreme Commander feared was slowly becoming real, but the alien queen still believed the humans of Haven 12 were nothing more than ordinary settlers living on a quiet world at the edge of the galaxy. And she had no idea that the next few hours would force her empire to question everything it believed about humanity. In the silent darkness surrounding Haven 12, the strange pattern of hidden objects continued to float motionless like forgotten debris, but inside the command chamber on Zithera Prime the atmosphere had begun to change. Because Supreme Commander Veron was no longer looking at the human colony with simple curiosity. He was studying it with the careful attention of a strategist who had started to suspect that something important was missing from the obvious picture. The reports coming from the scout fleet of the Zitherian Empire still described the colony as small and peaceful. Farms continued working. Cargo ships still landed slowly at the spaceport. And the same human mechanic identified as Daniel Carter was still repairing ships as if the galaxy beyond the atmosphere did not concern him at all. Yet every news scan revealed more of the same strange pattern of silent objects spread across deep space around the system. And what disturbed the commander the most was not their number, but their design. They were not random satellites. They were placed with perfect mathematical precision, forming a quiet defensive web that surrounded the colony like an invisible shield waiting to activate. One of the Imperial technicians finally spoke with uncertainty. "Commander, the configuration resembles a dormant weapons network." The room became quiet for a moment because the idea sounded absurd. No small colony would ever build such a complex system so far from the core territories of its species, and yet the evidence was there floating silently around Haven 12. Veron leaned closer to the display and ordered a deeper scan of the closest object. The holographic projection slowly magnified the structure until its details became clearer. Its outer shell looked simple, almost old, but beneath the surface the scanner detected layered shielding, advanced targeting arrays, and energy capacitors large enough to power a weapon capable of damaging capital ships. The technician looked shocked. "Commander, this is military technology, and not recent technology either." Veron's expression hardened slightly. "Explain." The technician pulled up comparative data from old archives and ancient battle records stored deep inside the Imperial databases. The architecture is outdated but extremely efficient. It resembles designs used in several large interstellar conflicts centuries ago. Before the technician could continue, the commander suddenly ordered something unexpected. "Open restricted archive file, designation HX 113. The officers around him exchanged nervous looks because that file group contained classified records from forgotten wars that the Empire rarely discussed. The system processed the request, and a new set of holographic reports appeared in the air above the command table. The files contained fragmented information about ancient battles fought across distant sectors long before the Zitherian Empire had expanded into its current power. Several species had been involved in those conflicts, and many civilizations had disappeared completely during those wars. But one name appeared again and again in the scattered records, a species described as unpredictable, resilient, and dangerously creative in warfare. Humans. The commander studied the reports in silence while the room remained still around him. The ancient documents described fleets that appeared weaker than their enemies, but somehow managed to win impossible battles through strange strategies and relentless determination. They used technology in unusual ways, turning civilian systems into weapons, modifying outdated equipment into powerful defenses, and building hidden networks that activated only when enemies moved too close. One of the older battle summaries included a warning written by a long-extinct alien admiral who had once fought them directly. The message had been preserved in the archive for centuries. Never assume a human position is undefended simply because you cannot see the defense. The commander slowly closed the file, his mind connecting the ancient warning with the silent objects surrounding Haven 12. Meanwhile, on the colony's surface, evening had fully settled across the landing fields. Soft lights illuminated the hangars while cargo crews finished loading supplies onto transport ships preparing for departure the next morning. Inside one of the quieter repair Bay's Daniel Carter, stood beside a large console examining several diagnostic screens that displayed orbital sensor data. The same faint objects detected by the alien fleet were also visible on his monitor, but unlike the aliens he knew exactly what they were, the display labeled them with calm precision. Outer Defense Grid, Standby Mode. Daniel studied the grid for a moment before adjusting a few system parameters with slow, deliberate movements. The defensive satellites did not power up or move. They simply remained in their silent positions across deep space. But their internal systems had begun running quiet readiness checks. Tiny pulses of encrypted communication moved between them like whispers in the dark, invisible to almost every sensor in the system except those designed to understand the network's language. A young technician from the colony walked into the bay and noticed Daniel watching the screens. "Everything okay with the satellites?" the technician asked casually. Daniel glanced at him briefly and gave a small calm nod. "Just routine maintenance checks," he replied, his tone relaxed as always. The technician accepted the answer without question and continued walking toward another workstation. To most people in the colony, Daniel Carter was simply the most experienced mechanic they had, a quiet man who understood machines better than most engineers. Very few people asked where he had learned such advanced systems, or why someone with his skills had chosen to live on a small frontier world. High above the planet, the alien scout fleet continued its observation mission, still believing they were studying a harmless agricultural settlement. But the more data they gathered, the more their reports began to sound uncertain. The commander of the scout ships finally transmitted a direct message to the Imperial Palace. "We have located multiple inactive orbital structures around the colony," he reported. "Their purpose is unknown, but their configuration suggests defensive capability." Back in the throne chamber, Queen Archelaus listened with growing impatience. "If they possess defenses, then destroy them," she said sharply. "You command the most advanced fleet in this sector. Surely a few outdated satellites cannot threaten you." But before the order could be carried out, Supreme Commander Veron raised his hand slightly, stopping the transmission. His eyes were still fixed on the star map, showing the quiet ring of hidden machines around Haven 12. "My queen," he said slowly, "there is another possibility we must consider." The queen looked at him with curiosity mixed with irritation. "Speak." The commander took a slow breath before answering. "This colony may not be a simple settlement," he said carefully. "It may be something else entirely." At that exact moment on Haven 12, Daniel Carter finished reviewing the final diagnostic line on his console. The defense grid remained perfectly silent, perfectly hidden, and perfectly ready. He reached forward and disabled the display before leaving the repair bay and stepping once again beneath the open night sky of the colony. Above him, the stars shimmered quietly across the darkness, while the alien scout ships continued watching from orbit, still convinced they were studying an ordinary frontier outpost. But deep within the silent machines surrounding the system, thousands of dormant targeting programs had already completed their first readiness cycle, waiting patiently for the moment someone made the mistake of attacking the small human colony that the galaxy still believed was weak, harmless, and completely unprepared for war. The quiet system of Haven 12 had remained calm for many hours, but the silence was beginning to feel strange even to the officers of the Zytherian Empire who were watching from orbit. Their 3 scout ships floated like dark shadows above the blue world, while their sensors continued scanning the colony again and again. Every report still described the same peaceful activity on the surface. Cargo ships moving slowly through the small spaceport, workers repairing machines, farms glowing softly under the colony lights, and among them the same human mechanic, Daniel Carter, walking calmly across the landing platforms as if nothing unusual existed in the sky above him. The alien officers could not understand why the humans had not reacted yet, because their scanners confirmed again and again that the colony's basic sensors must have already detected the presence of foreign ships in orbit. Inside the Imperial Palace command chamber on Zithra Prime, the tension was slowly growing between patience and pride. Queen Archelaus had listened to hours of cautious analysis from Supreme Commander Veron, and her patience with the situation was finally reaching its limit. She stood from her crystalline throne and looked at the holographic map of the Haven 12 system with sharp, glowing eyes. The small human colony appeared insignificant on the display compared to the vast fleets of the Empire. "You have delayed long enough, Commander," she said firmly. "If these humans possess hidden defenses, then we will destroy them and claim the system." The chamber fell silent while Veyron considered her order. He had studied the ancient records. He had seen the strange network surrounding the colony, and every instinct told him that attacking without understanding the system first would be a mistake. But the Queen's authority was absolute within the Empire. After a long moment, the commander finally gave the order. "Scout fleet, approach the colony and begin defensive suppression." Far above Haven 12, the alien ships slowly powered their engines. The dark vessels moved closer toward the planet in a control formation, their weapon systems warming quietly as they prepared to test the strange orbital structures that had been detected earlier. The commander of the scout fleet spoke calmly to his crew. "Target the nearest satellite and fire a precision pulse," he ordered. "Minimal power. This is only a test." Below them, the peaceful colony continued its nightly routine. Lights glowed across the landing fields while workers finished their shifts and returned to their homes. Inside one of the hangars, Daniel Carter stepped out of the repair station again. Carrying a small data tablet in his hand, he walked slowly across the landing platform and paused for a moment while looking up at the stars. To anyone nearby, he looked like a man enjoying the quiet beauty of the night sky. But the small tablet in his hand had just displayed a single silent alert. "Orbital movement detected." Daniel read the message calmly, then placed the tablet into his jacket pocket without reacting. He simply turned and continued walking across the platform toward a control console attached to the outer wall of the hangar. High above him, the alien scout ship locked its targeting system onto the closest inactive object floating beyond the colony. The small satellite drifted silently in deep space, exactly where it had been for months. The alien officer confirmed the firing solution and pressed the command. A narrow beam of blue energy shot through the darkness and struck the silent object. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The alien officers believed the test was successful, but then the situation changed instantly. The satellite suddenly came alive. Its outer shell unfolded with mechanical precision while a brilliant shield of energy flashed into existence around its core. The blue beam from the alien weapon shattered harmlessly against the shield as if it had struck a wall of light. Before the alien crew could react, the satellite's internal systems activated completely. Dozens of hidden panels opened across its surface, revealing advanced sensor arrays and targeting emitters that began scanning the attacking ships with frightening speed. Inside the alien command deck, alarms erupted immediately. "Energy surge detected," one officer shouted. "Multiple signal bursts across the system," another yelled. At that exact moment, dozens of the silent objects surrounding Haven 12 awakened together. One after another, the hidden satellites powered up across deep space, glowing points of energy appearing across the star map like a sudden storm of light. Back on Zithera Prime, the holographic display in the throne chamber exploded with activity as the defensive grid activated across the entire system. Technicians rushed to interpret the rapidly changing data, while Queen Archelaus stared at the screen in disbelief. "What is happening?" she demanded. One of the analysts answered with visible shock in his voice. "The entire orbital network has activated. My queen, there are far more satellites than we originally detected." "How many?" she asked sharply. The analyst hesitated for a moment before replying. "At least 80, possibly over 100. In orbit above Haven 12, the alien scout fleet suddenly found itself surrounded by a web of active defense platforms, each satellite now projecting targeting lines toward the intruding ships. But strangely, none of them fired immediately. They simply tracked the alien vessels with calm mechanical precision, as if waiting for something. Inside the scout ship bridge, the alien captain spoke urgently to the Empire command. "We are being targeted by multiple weapons platforms. Their power output is far greater than expected." Meanwhile, on the surface of the colony, Daniel Carter reached the small console attached to the hangar wall and typed a quiet command into the system. His expression remained calm, while distant lights flickered briefly in the sky above the planet. Across the orbit of Haven, 12, the defensive network completed its activation cycle. Hundreds of targeting programs aligned simultaneously, each weapon platform calculating angles, energy levels, and firing solutions with perfect synchronization. Back inside the Imperial Palace, Supreme Commander Veron looked at the holographic map with grim understanding. The pattern was unmistakable now. The colony had never been undefended. It had been quietly protected by a fully integrated orbital defense grid designed to wake up only when attacked. Exactly the kind of system described in the ancient war archives about human strategies. "My queen," the commander said slowly. Queen Archelaus did not look away from the display. The calm farming colony she had dismissed earlier was now surrounded by one of the most sophisticated defensive networks she had ever seen. "Yes, Commander," she replied coldly. Veron's voice was quiet but firm as he answered. "The humans were waiting for us to fire first." At that exact moment, the first satellite weapon locked completely onto the alien scout ship that had fired the initial shot. Its energy core brightened as the system prepared to respond to the attack. And for the first time since arriving in the system, the officers of the Scytherian Empire realized that the small, peaceful colony they believed was weak had just delivered the first real shock of the encounter. Because the ordinary human settlement on Haven 12 had just revealed a defense system powerful enough to challenge an Imperial fleet. And the most frightening part of the situation was that the human colony itself still appeared completely calm, as if everything that was happening in orbit had been expected from the very beginning. The sudden awakening of the orbital defense grid around Haven 12 changed the entire atmosphere of the system. What had once appeared to be a quiet farming colony was now surrounded by a perfectly organized network of weapons platforms that tracked every movement of the alien scout ships. Glowing lines of targeting data stretched across space like invisible chains locking the vessels in place. Yet the most unsettling detail for the officers of the Scytherian Empire was that none of the weapons had fired. The satellites simply watched them with cold mechanical patience, as if waiting for a decision that had not yet been made. Inside the bridge of the lead scout vessel, alarms continued flashing across the consoles while the captain tried to understand the scale of the defensive system that had suddenly appeared around them. "We underestimated the colony," one officer admitted nervously. "This is not a small defense network," another added while scanning the growing number of active satellites. The captain immediately opened a direct communication channel to the Imperial Command Center on Zithra Prime. The holographic projection of Supreme Commander Veron appeared on the bridge, surrounded by shifting tactical data. His expression was calm but serious. "Commander, we are currently targeted by over 100 orbital weapons platforms," the captain reported. "Their energy output is capable of disabling our ships if they fire simultaneously." Veron studied the tactical display carefully. The pattern was now clear. The satellites were not randomly placed defensive tools. They were part of a complete strategic system designed to trap hostile fleets once they crossed a specific distance from the colony. The commander slowly folded his hands behind his back while analyzing the situation. Then behind him, the powerful voice of Queen Archelaus filled the chamber. "Destroy them," she ordered coldly. "Our empire does not retreat from primitive defenses." The technicians in the command room hesitated slightly, waiting for the commander's response. Veron remained silent for a long moment before answering the queen. "My queen, there is something you must understand about humans," he said quietly. The queen turned her gaze toward him, clearly annoyed by the hesitation in his voice. "They are farmers on a distant colony," she replied sharply. "What could possibly threaten an Imperial fleet?" But Veron activated a new display beside the tactical map. The hologram showed ancient data recovered from long-forgotten wars recorded in deep Imperial archives. The faded reports described battles fought across several distant sectors many centuries earlier, conflicts where entire alien coalitions had been defeated by a species that was considered technologically weaker at the time. Humans. The queen stared at the archive images with disbelief while the commander explained slowly. "These records are from before our empire expanded into this region of the galaxy," Veron said. They describe a species that rarely begins wars, but becomes extremely dangerous once attacked. He zoomed the display to show several examples from those ancient conflicts: hidden defense networks, modified civilian stations converted into weapons platforms, and fleets that appeared suddenly from deep space after enemies believed they had secured an easy victory. The humans developed a strategic philosophy based on patience and deception. The commander continued. They allow their enemies to believe they are weak. They allow them to make the first move, and only then do they reveal the full extent of their defenses. Queen Archelaus crossed her arms as she watched the data scroll across the holographic screen. "You are suggesting this colony is a trap," she said slowly. "I believe it may be a defensive outpost," Veron answered carefully, "possibly maintained by veterans of their old wars." Far below on the surface of Haven, 12 the colony continued to look peaceful despite the silent confrontation unfolding in orbit. Lights glowed warmly across the settlement, while families walked through quiet streets and cargo workers finished their final tasks of the evening. No one appeared to panic or run for shelter, as if the people living on the planet already trusted the invisible shield protecting them from the alien fleet above. Inside the repair hangar near the landing platforms, Daniel Carter stood beside the same console he had used earlier. The orbital display in front of him showed the entire defensive grid surrounding the planet, each satellite marked with a green status indicator confirming that the network was functioning perfectly. The alien scout ships appeared as 3 red symbols trapped within the outer perimeter of the defense system. Daniel studied the map for a few seconds before pressing a small control on the screen. A quiet signal moved through the network instantly, not a weapon command, but something else entirely. Deep beyond the orbit of Haven 12, far outside the range of most scanners, several dark shapes began to move slowly in response to the signal. They had been drifting silently in deep space for many months, hidden behind asteroid clusters and faint radiation clouds. Their hulls carried no bright lights, and their communication systems remained completely silent. But now their engines began warming gradually, as if awakening from a long sleep. Back on the alien scout ship bridge, the tactical officer suddenly looked up in alarm. "Captain, new contacts appearing at the edge of the system." The captain moved closer to the display. "How many?" he asked quickly. The officer adjusted the scan resolution and a number appeared on the screen. At least 12 ships, possibly more emerging behind them. Inside the Imperial Palace command chamber, the same sensor data appeared across the large holographic map. The new contacts formed a loose formation far beyond the colony, but clearly moving toward Haven. 12 with controlled speed. Queen Archelaus stared at the incoming signals with growing frustration. "More human ships," she said sharply. But the commander shook his head slowly. "No, not just ships," Veron replied quietly. The holographic display magnified one of the approaching vessels. Its design looked simple compared to the elegant warships of the Empire, yet the energy readings coming from its core were unexpectedly strong, far stronger than any normal cargo ship or civilian transport should possess. "These are not civilian vessels," the commander continued. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then what are they?" she demanded. Veron answered with calm certainty. "Retired warships," he said, "reactivated for defense." Down on Haven, 12 Daniel Carter finally turned away from the console and stepped outside the hangar once again. The night sky above the colony looked peaceful as always, but somewhere beyond those stars a small human fleet was slowly moving closer to the system, responding to a signal that only a few people in the galaxy could send. Daniel looked upward for a moment with a quiet expression before speaking softly to himself. "They noticed faster than I expected," he murmured, because the truth that the alien empire was only beginning to realize was far more dangerous than they had imagined. The human colony on Haven 12 was not simply protected by hidden satellites or clever defenses. It was connected to something larger, something older, a quiet network of human veterans who had once fought across the galaxy and who still remembered exactly how to respond when an empire made the mistake of threatening humanity again. The quiet system surrounding Haven 12 had now transformed into a tense standoff in deep space. The once peaceful orbit above the colony was filled with silent tension as more than 100 awakened defense satellites continued tracking the 3 scout ships of the Zytherian Empire. Glowing targeting lines surrounded the alien vessels like invisible cages, yet the satellites still had not fired a single shot, and that silence was beginning to feel far more threatening than open battle because it suggested control, patience, and confidence. The kind of confidence that usually belonged to someone who already knew how the situation would end. Inside the bridge of the lead alien scout ship, the captain stared at the tactical display while new warnings continued appearing across the screen. The network of defense platforms around the planet was stable, coordinated, and extremely precise. Every weapon remained locked onto the Imperial vessels without hesitation. But what truly worried the officers now was the new set of signals approaching from deep space beyond the system. "Captain, the incoming vessels have increased speed," the tactical officer reported nervously. The captain leaned closer to the display, watching the distant icons move slowly across the star map. "Identify them," ordered. The scanners worked quickly, but the results only deepened the unease spreading across the bridge. "They're using old but heavily modified drive signatures," the officer replied. "Their designs resemble outdated human military ships." "How outdated?" the captain asked. The officer hesitated before answering. "Over 2 centuries old." The bridge fell silent for a moment, because ships that old should not still be operating in active space. Yet the energy output coming from those approaching vessels suggested that they had been rebuilt, upgraded, and carefully maintained for a very long time. Back in the Imperial Command Chamber on Zythera Prime, the same sensor data appeared across the massive holographic star map in front of Queen Archelaus and Supreme Commander Veyron. The approaching ships were now clearly visible, 12 vessels forming the front of the formation, while several more faint signals followed behind them. The Queen watched the display with visible irritation. "Primitive warships," she said dismissively. "Our fleet could destroy them in minutes." But Veyron remained silent while studying the tactical arrangement. His eyes moved slowly between the defense satellites surrounding Haven 12 and the approaching human ships beyond the system. The pattern now revealed something deeply familiar to him, a layered defense strategy designed not to attack first, but to control the battlefield before the enemy fully understood what was happening. "My queen," he said carefully, "this situation is evolving rapidly." Queen Archelaus turned toward him with clear impatience. "Then issue the attack order and end it," she replied sharply. Veyron did not answer immediately. Instead, he activated another display, showing a simulation of the battle if the alien scout fleet opened fire on the satellites or the incoming ships. The model calculated several possible outcomes in seconds. Every scenario produced the same result: heavy damage to the scout fleet within the first few minutes of combat. The Queen looked at the projection and frowned slightly. "These projections assume the satellites fire simultaneously," she said. "They will," Veyron replied calmly. He expanded the simulation further, showing a larger strategic possibility if the Empire decided to send additional warships into the system to reinforce the scout fleet. The outcome did not improve much, because the human defense grid had already established full control over the orbital space around Haven 12, and the incoming human ships were moving into positions that would create overlapping firing zones across the entire region. "This colony is not meant to win a battle quickly," the commander explained slowly. "It is designed to trap hostile fleets inside a controlled battlefield." The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the tactical map. "You believe the humans planned this?" she asked. "I believe they expected someone to try exactly what we just attempted," Veyron replied quietly. Meanwhile, on the surface of Haven 12, the colony continued its calm, nightly routine. Soft lights illuminated the landing platforms while distant cargo shuttles rested quietly in their docking bays. Standing near the edge of the hangar platform, Daniel Carter watched the stars in silence. The faint glow of orbital satellites could occasionally be seen far above the planet like small sparks of light moving slowly through the sky. Inside his pocket, the small tablet he carried vibrated gently with a new message. He removed it and read the short notification appearing on the screen. Human response fleet. 18 minutes from system edge. Daniel studied the message for a moment before placing the device away again. His calm expression did not change. He simply leaned slightly against the railing and continued watching the sky as if he had already expected the situation to unfold exactly this way. Far above the planet, the alien scout ships remained surrounded by the silent defensive network while the approaching human vessels continued closing the distance. The tactical officer on the alien bridge suddenly spoke again. "Captain, additional signals detected behind the first group of ships." "How many?" the captain asked quickly. "Unknown, possibly dozens." The captain immediately transmitted the update to the Imperial Command Center. Back on Zithera Prime, the new data appeared instantly across the star map, revealing faint shapes emerging deeper in the darkness behind the first line of human ships. The total number was still unclear, but the formation suggested something far larger than a small defensive patrol. Queen Archelaus stared at the display in growing disbelief. "How many ships do the humans have in this region?" she demanded. Veyron answered quietly. "That is the problem, my queen," he said. "We do not know." He stepped closer to the holographic map and examined the expanding signals carefully. The ancient war records he had studied earlier suddenly felt far less distant. The same pattern was repeating itself, humans appearing weak until the exact moment they revealed how much strength they had been hiding. Finally, the commander turned toward the queen again, his expression calm but firm. "My queen, if we escalate this conflict further, we risk drawing a much larger human response into the region." The queen remained silent for several seconds while the tactical display continued updating in front of her. The once simple mission to observe or capture a small colony had now evolved into a complex standoff against an unknown number of hidden human forces. At last she spoke again, her voice quieter but still proud. "What do you recommend, Commander?" Veyron did not hesitate this time. "I recommend immediate withdrawal of the scout fleet," he said. The officers in the chamber looked at him with shock, because such a decision would be extremely rare for the powerful Empire. Queen Archelaus slowly turned her gaze toward the holographic map once more, the silent satellites, the approaching human ships, and the trapped scout fleet all glowing across the system display. For a long moment the chamber remained completely silent. Then finally the queen gave a slow nod. "Very well," she said. Veyron immediately opened a direct communication channel to the alien fleet in orbit around Haven. 12. The captain of the lead scout vessel appeared on the screen waiting for orders. The commander looked at him calmly before issuing a command that had almost never been spoken in the long history of the Zytherian Empire. "All vessels," Veyron said clearly, "withdraw from the system immediately." Inside the alien scout ships, the officers stared at their displays in disbelief. The order echoed across every console, while the engines of the Imperial vessels slowly began powering up for retreat. And in that moment, across the entire Empire, the most shocking realization of the encounter became clear. The powerful Zytherian fleet had just been forced to retreat, not by a massive human armada, but by a quiet colony that had patiently waited for its enemy to make the first mistake. The silent withdrawal of the Imperial Scout fleet from the system of Haven 12 became one of the most unexpected moments in the history of the Zytherian Empire. The three dark ships that had arrived with quiet confidence only hours earlier were now slowly turning away from the small blue world they had believed would be an easy conquest. Their engines glowing faintly as they carefully moved out of the orbital range controlled by the vast network of human defense satellites. None of the weapons. Platforms fired at them during the retreat. The satellites simply continued tracking their movements with cold mechanical precision, like silent watchers ensuring that the Imperial vessels truly intended to leave the system peacefully. Inside the bridge of the lead scout ship, the alien officers worked quietly and with unusual tension. No one spoke loudly because every member of the crew understood what had just happened. They had entered a system expecting to dominate a weak colony, but instead, they had discovered a carefully prepared defensive trap that could have destroyed them if the humans had chosen to activate it fully. and now they were leaving under orders to retreat before the situation escalated further. Far away on Zithera Prime, the enormous throne chamber of Queen Archelaus was unusually quiet. The glowing holographic map in the center of the room still displayed the Haven 12 system, while the Imperial Scout ships slowly moved away from the planet's orbit. Around them, the web of human satellites remained active, hundreds of silent machines floating patiently in the darkness like guardians protecting the colony below. Standing beside the display, Supreme Commander Veyron watched the retreat unfold with a calm expression. But the Queen herself remained completely still on her throne, her sharp eyes fixed on the map while she processed everything that had happened during the encounter. For centuries, she finally said slowly, our empire has expanded across the galaxy without encountering resistance that we could not overcome. Her voice was calm but thoughtful, very different from the earlier confidence she had shown when the first reports about the human colony arrived. Veyron remained silent, waiting for her to continue. We believe humans were scattered and weak, the Queen said, a young species with little influence in the wider galaxy. The commander nodded slightly. That assumption may no longer be accurate, he replied carefully. The Queen stood from her throne and slowly walked toward the holographic star map. The projection enlarged the Haven 12 system in front of her, showing the defensive network still surrounding the planet like a glowing shield. The approaching human ships had now arrived near the outer edges of the system, forming a loose protective formation behind the satellite grid. They had not pursued the Imperial fleet. They had simply taken positions as if confirming that the colony remained secure. That colony never fired a single shot, the Queen observed quietly. Yes, Veyron answered, they did not need to. For a moment, the Queen said nothing. She studied the quiet system and the calm organization of the human defenses. Then she spoke again. They allowed us to believe they were vulnerable, she said slowly. Exactly, the commander replied. The Queen turned slightly toward him. They waited until we attacked first, she continued. Yes, and only then did they reveal their strength. Veyron nodded once more. That is consistent with the ancient records, he explained. Humans prefer deterrence over open war. They build defenses designed to discourage aggression rather than seek conquest. The Queen looked back at the map again, her expression now thoughtful rather than angry. So the colony was never meant to defeat us, she said. No, the commander replied quietly. It was meant to convince us that attacking them would be a mistake. At that moment, a new signal appeared on the edge of the holographic display. One of the approaching human ships had transmitted a short communication packet toward the Imperial fleet that was leaving the system. The message was simple, encoded in several galactic trade languages, so it could not be misunderstood. Peaceful traffic may pass through Haven 12 space freely. Hostile forces will be stopped. The Queen read the message in silence. The humans had not threatened the Empire. They had not mocked the retreat. They had simply stated their position clearly and calmly. After a few seconds, the Queen gave a small, thoughtful smile. They are confident, she said quietly. Yes, Veyron replied. And now we understand why. Far below on the surface of Haven 12, the colony continued its normal life. The orbital satellites gradually returned to a lower activity state while the human ships took up long-term patrol positions around the system. Inside the familiar repair hangar near the landing platforms, Daniel Carter stood beside the console where he had monitored the entire encounter. The display now showed a calm green status across the defense network. The alien fleet was leaving, and the approaching human ships had secured the outer system without needing to fire a single weapon. Daniel closed the display and stepped outside the hangar once again. The stars above Haven 12 looked peaceful as always, distant lights slowly moving across the sky as the defense satellites returned to quiet standby positions. To anyone watching the colony from far away, it would once again appear like a simple agricultural world on the edge of civilized space, calm, quiet, and completely ordinary. Daniel rested his arms on the railing and looked upward for a moment before speaking softly to himself. Hopefully they learned something today, he murmured, because the truth about humans, the truth that the Zetherian Empire had finally begun to understand, was simple but powerful, humanity did not always show its strength openly. It did not need to dominate every star system or threaten every neighboring civilization. Instead, humans built quiet defenses, formed quiet alliances, and waited patiently. And when someone finally tested those defenses, they discovered that the ordinary worlds of humanity were often protected by extraordinary preparation. Back in the Imperial Palace, Queen Archelaus continued watching the final signals from Haven. 12 as the scout fleet exited the system completely. The stars of that distant region slowly faded from the display, while the holographic map returned to the wider galaxy. "Commander," the Queen said thoughtfully. "Yes, my Queen." She paused for a moment before giving a new order, one very different from the aggressive commands she had issued earlier. "Update our strategic records," she said calmly. "Humans are not to be underestimated." Veyron inclined his head respectfully. "It will be done," he replied. And somewhere far across the galaxy, the quiet colony of Haven, 12 returned to its peaceful routine, still appearing like one of the most ordinary human worlds in existence. Even though it had just forced a powerful empire to retreat without firing a single shot, proving once again that sometimes the most dangerous